What's good, Cubers? It's your boy Matt, and today I wanted to take a look at a card from War of the Spark. Set's been out for a minute now. We've all had a chance to kind of play with it, evaluate it, do some limited, draft, CO constructed, whatever your personal poison is. So today I wanted to take a look at Ajani the Greathearted and see if there's a place in our cube for this new Planeswalker. So let's get started. So the first thing I need to do is actually apologize for the card art on Ajani here. This set is still really new right now, and this is the clearest copy of the card I can find. So I'm sure there's something clear by the time you're seeing this, but like I said, set's still really new. So anyway, Ajani the Greathearted. For 2 in Selesnya, we get a legendary Planeswalker, Ajani. Static ability, creatures you control have vigilance. +1, you gain 3 life. -2, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control and a loyalty counter on each other Planeswalker you control. And I actually think Ajani is one of the most interesting Selesnya walkers we've had in a really long time. So, what are the pros for Ajani? Well, he's a 4-mana walker for 5 loyalty, which is decent, and his casting cost is reasonable. 4 mana, that's not bad, you can play him on curve. Static vigilance is really good. It helps protect from crackback, because Ajani doesn't actually protect himself when he comes in, but if you've got creatures on the field, they'll have vigilance so they can protect him. And the -2 is really strong. A +1/+1 counter on all your creatures, plus all your Planeswalkers is really good. But like all good things, Ajani does come with some drawbacks, and the biggest one is that Ajani sucks on an empty board. He's just horrible. He can't protect himself without creatures in front of him, and you can't -2 him and use his abilities if the board is empty, because there's no targets for it. And the other drawback of Ajani is that he doesn't have an ulti? No ultimate? Sadness. But, like I always say, we don't play walkers for their ultimates. Most of the time you don't get to use them anyway. So, let's talk a little bit more about Ajani, and let's take a closer look at how bad the cons are and at how good the pros are. Turns out Ajani the Greathearted is not the only Ajani we see in Cube. Sometimes people play Ajani Mentor of Heroes, so let's look at him. 3 in Selesnya, +1, distribute 3 +1/+1 counters amongst 1, 2, or 3 target creatures you control. +1, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal an aura, creature, planeswalker card from among them and put it into your hand. The rest go on the bottom in any order. And his ultimate, -8, you gain 100 life. Well, crap. 100 life, that's a lot of life. So, new Ajani costs less than old Ajani. Both of them put counters on your creatures, but new Ajani will do all of them, and your planeswalkers too. He's basically like a proliferate. Old Ajani, though, gives you card draw. Card draw is so hard to come by in Selesnya. Looking at the top 4 cards of your library, whenever you plus them, it's like having Impulse on a stick, just sitting on the board for you to use anytime you want. While new Ajani's +1 is kind of benign at just gaining 3 life, which could be useful against aggressive decks, but I don't actually think is great in terms of overall value. So which Ajani do I prefer? I think I actually prefer new Ajani. And let me tell you why. First, I like the vigilance. I like the idea that all of my creatures are going to help protect Ajani and still be able to swing in. I think there's some upside there. I also really like that he puts +1/+1 counters on everything, including my planeswalkers. I think what you're really going to want to do with new Ajani is play him and immediately minus him to buff your board. I don't think you're going to spend a lot of time plussing new Ajani. Old Ajani is fine, and if you still want to play him over new Ajani, I 100% understand. Having the ability to draw cards in Selesnya is just unbeatable. But old Ajani doesn't really see a lot of cube play, and that should tell us something about him too. Old Ajani's ultimate isn't actually game ending, and you're never going to hit it anyway, and new Ajani actually spreads counters better because it spreads it to more creatures and your planeswalkers, and he does all of that for less mana. So I think new Ajani is the way to go. But when we're talking about guild cards, we can't just compare them to other cards in their mana slot or other cards of their type, because we don't get a lot of them. So let's look at the Selesnya Cube staples. Kitchen Finks is #1 on the list. He slots into so many different decks, and the fact that he's hybrid means that he could be played in a Simic deck, or he could be played in a Boros deck. There's just a lot of different options. He's aggressively statted, and he comes back from the dead. He is probably your #1 Selesnya choice. Knight of Autumn for me is #2. She's crazy flexible. +1/+1 counters on the Knight, destroying artifacts or enchantments, gaining 4 life. All really strong, really good cube. Voice of Resurgence is a 2-drop that when it dies, hopefully replaces itself with a larger creature, which is nice, and it doesn't cost 3, like Kitchen Finks and Night of Autumn, so we've got some diversity there. And then the Pride Mage, who I think is probably the more popular cube choice for a lot of people, but I also think that he's not as good as he used to be, and if you're not playing Night of Autumn in his spot, you should be, because they really kind of do the same thing. The question is there room for Ajani in this group? And I actually think that maybe there is. I think especially if you have replaced the Pride Mage with Night of Autumn, then you probably have some room if you want to give Ajani a try. He slots in at a 4-drop, which again, I know we're not 100% worried about curve inside our guilds because we're talking about such a small group of cards, but still the fact that he's not another 3-drop is also a point in his favor because you don't want all of your guild cards to have the same casting cost. I'm looking at you, Brule. Yes, we're talking about you. So, if you're running 5 guild cards, then I definitely think you can give Ajani a try. But what kind of decks want Nua Johnny? Tokens, bro. Tokens. Token decks want Ajani. If you play Ajani and the following turn drop the Deranged Hermit or Avenger of Zendikar and then minus Ajani to plus all those squirrels that are now 3/3s, that is bananas. That is the best case scenario. Or maybe you're playing Ajani and you've got Elspeth, Sun's Champion out, and you plus her to make 3 1/1 white soldier tokens, and then you plus Ajani to buff all the tokens and to add a counter to Elspeth, which just gets her 1 step closer to her ultimate. So Ajani goes great in any token deck. Even cards like Monastery Mentor and Burmaz, the King of Oreskos, make tokens, and Ajani then buffs those tokens, and you get an awesome board presence in return. But I also want to point out Ajani's interactions with Elspeth again. Ajani actually could work in the Super Friends deck. If you were playing a bunch of Planeswalkers, Ajani doesn't have an ultimate, but they do, and he will take them closer and closer to that ultimate at a much faster speed. And I can hear what you're saying, even right now. Matt, this is best case scenario. This is the ceiling for this card. What does the floor look like? Well, let's take a look at a deck that isn't playing any token generators and how Ajani might factor into that. What if we just curve out? What if we just play a creature on every single turn? Turn 1, Savannah Lions. Turn 2, Duskwatch Recruiter. Turn 3, Courser of Krufix. Turn 4, Ajani, Downtick. Here's what happens. We would have a 3/2 Lion, a 3/3 Duskwatch, and a 3/5 Courser all standing in front of Ajani, all with Vigilance, and perhaps able to swing in. Now, I do know that we're talking about playing Solitaire, and the odds are that at least one of those creatures is gone on turn 4, or you're definitely winning that game. But still, Ajani does maintain some value, even if all we do is curve out. Now, I know the real floor on this card is you play the Lions, the Courser, and the Duskwatch, and they all end up dead, and then turn 4, you play Ajani into an empty board, which feels really bad. That's the real floor on this card. But I think most of the time when you play Ajani, there'll be at least one thing, probably 2 in front of him, and you can downtick him and put counters on those cards and get some value. Where does this leave us with Ajani? Ajani is a card that I think a lot of people are really sleeping on, that he's an underrated cube performer and can probably get into larger cubes, especially those that offer 5 or 6 slots for their guild cards. I don't think he is Selesnya staple good. He's not Night of Autumn or Kitchen Finks, but I do think you'll have a lot of fun including him in your cube in the short term. I do think he is a card that eventually gets beaten and pushed out of the cube by something else, but in the short term, you can play Ajani and enjoy some of the really interesting interactions he'll have with other cards in your cube. That's going to do it for today, Cubers. If you've got a question, feel free to leave it in the comments below, or if there's a card you want us to cover for Card of the Week and analyze for you, we'll be glad to do that too. Just leave it below. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button. It's a big deal to us. Press that, come on, press the button. Press the little thumbs up. Come on, press it. Press it. I'll stop and wait. No, I won't. We don't have time for that. But press the button though. It's important. I'll see you next time, and until then, shuffle up and keep cubing, my friends.